Hola, from Mexico. I'm Bob Henderson. I'm the Nomad Dad for the Nomad Capitalist. Yeah, I'm the old guy. Supposed to be the wise old owl. Some of these ideas that I talk about are mine. Some of them come from Andrew's production and social media staff in Tbilisi, Georgia. Thank you, Taco and Lika, for the good ideas. So I'm supposed to be the guy that, has been around for 60 years or so, and maybe give you a little bit of perspective that somebody in the millennial generation can't because they didn't live it. One of the topics they wanted me to discuss is, quote unquote, the crash of the American dream. Now, those are their words. I'm not sure it's crashed, but I think it's in serious difficulty. That is the American dream. Throughout many, many decades and generations, it's a truism that every succeeding generation did better than the previous generation. And the parents always were optimistic that their kids would do better than their generation did. That is clearly not the case today. As you know, and I've talked about this, we're in the fourth turning. We're in the most dangerous period of the fourth turning. There have been three previous ones in American history. Of course, the Revolution in the late 1700s, then the Civil War in the middle of the 1800s, and then the third, fourth turning was the Depression and World War II in the 30s and 40s. And so here we are in another fourth turning. All the previous fourth turnings have turned out well, but it was a very difficult period of time to go through. And I submit that we're going to go through this. It's going to take most of the decade to go through it until we get a resolution, for better or worse. There's no guarantee that it comes out better. I'm certainly hoping that it does, but there's no guarantee. So the crash of the American dream. Let me say, as I was discussing last week, I was talking about some of the problems in the country, and I was talking about the time that my father was a delegate to one of the political conventions, and he helped to nominate Barry Goldwater for president in 1964, and Goldwater got absolutely annihilated, won I think 6 states out of 50. Lyndon Johnson won, and he won decisively. And in 1965, then we enacted the Great Society. And by the way, that was the biggest thing since the Depression in terms of the social welfare state. And we want to add on to that today with a 50-50 Senate and a House of Representatives with a 3 or 4 seat majority for the Democratic Party. I got to thinking about this recently. Johnson enacted the Great Society with 295 Democrats in the House of Representatives and only 140 Republicans, 2-1. Today they have a 3 or 4 seat majority and they want to turn the economy upside down. Well, the voters were for that back then. They were happy with that. Now, it turned out to be a real problem in the 70s because we spent too much money, which led to Nixon taking us off the gold standard, which led to wage and price controls, which led to lots of inflation, stagflation in the 70s, and a very difficult time, mainly because we spent too much money on the social program and throw in the cost of the Vietnam War, those two together. Okay, so here's Ronald Reagan that comes in 1980 to kind of undo a little bit of that and to grow the economy back and give us some more freedom back. And we had a wonderful decade, and Bill Clinton didn't upset that in the 90s, so we had a nice 20-year run. So Reagan had a distinct minority in the House. They did win the Senate back, Reagan's party, but he had a distinct minority position in the House of Representatives. Rather than trying to cram it down the throats of the American public like the left is trying to do today with their legislation, Reagan went over the heads of Congress and went directly to the American people and convinced them this is what we need to do. And we had the greatest growth period in the history of the United States. Sorry, Donald Trump, it happened in the 80s. Okay, and Clinton was smart enough not to undo that to any great extent in the 1990s. And so I say, these politicians, rather than cramming it down the throats and then having a huge problem afterwards, why don't we persuade one another? Why don't we bring the plans to the American people? It may pass, it may not, but to me that makes a lot more sense. So what was I talking about? I'm talking about the crash of the American dream, and I'm going to say those are the words of the production staff here. I don't think it's crashed, but I think it's in serious trouble. And I think that there's this ongoing battle that we're going to see more and more and I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for this. The boomers versus the millennials. Now, I'm a boomer. I was born not at the front of the boomers, but maybe midway through. I am a boomer. I didn't vote for any of this nonsense. I'll take responsibility as a boomer, but I'm not a boomer who only thought about themselves and continues to only think about themselves today, voting themselves more and more entitlement programs. Boomers are getting a 6% increase in their Social Security in 2022. That's the most in 40 years. Who's paying for that? The millennials. I can understand why the millennials are just ticked off. We lied to you by giving you trophies when you were in school, just for showing up. So now you go out into the real world, you show up and you get your butt kicked. We lied to you. We told you you had to go to college. And now you've got tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and you can't get a decent job unless you're at the very top of the heap. We've lied to you, okay? And I'll apologize for the boomers. I understand your angst and I understand your anger as a result of that. I came out of college in 1975. We had the worst recession 2 years prior to that. 73, 75 was the worst recession since the Depression in the 30s and 40s. Very hard to find positions. And all the kids I graduated with, nobody got a job in the field that they majored in because there weren't any jobs or very few. So I understand that. It was difficult. But then we had a great period in the 80s and 90s. Okay. Hopefully that same thing can happen for you, but it's not going to happen if you continue to embrace these socialistic policy ideas. That is my concern. It killed millions, tens of millions of people in the 20th century. Socialism, communism did. From Russia to Eastern Europe to China to Cambodia to Laos, you name it. It is not the answer. Look at Venezuela today. Look at a place like Argentina, which 100 years ago was the fourth wealthiest country in the world. They adopted the wrong policies. Look at them now. It is not the answer. Growing the economy is the answer. Free market capitalism, which we haven't had for years, by the way. This is crony capitalism at best, okay? I can talk a little bit more about the fact that we don't have capitalism because we don't have the one thing that is central to capitalism, and that is price discovery. The Federal Reserve has taken that away by artificially setting the interest rates and by being the backstop to the bond market. As a result, there is no price discovery and you got everything out of whack. And at some point it's going to correct. So millennials, I understand your angst. Socialism is not the answer. You must demand of the politicians that we go back to the policies of the 80s and 90s. Something like that will make a lot of sense. Eastern Europe, to some degree, adopted that after the fall of communism in the late 80s, early 90s. They are far better off, although not perfect, but far better off than they were then. This has taken more people out of poverty than any other thing in the world. It's not perfect because it's run by human beings, okay, who obviously come up short. I understand your angst. The crash of the American dream, not really a crash, but it's in deep trouble. It can be rescued, but you gotta have freedom, you gotta have the rule of law, and you gotta have free market capitalism. I'm Bob Henderson. So nice to have you stop by. I'm the Nomad Dad for the Nomad Capitalist.
Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.